Adam Taxin with Daniel Greenfield talking about Israel's War of Words, his column for Monday, July 23rd, 2012. Welcome, Daniel, and this is a pretty pessimistic column. It seems, I guess, maybe appropriate for the 9 days which we're in right now, but it seems to suggest that there's no way Israel will ever make it a functioning government.
Well, I wouldn't say it's quite that pessimistic, though it's hard to write about Israeli politics and be optimistic because it's very messed up. Then it's hard to write about the closer politics of any country and still be optimistic. But most countries keep on ticking despite their completely dysfunctional politics, and Israeli politics have always been incredibly dysfunctional. This is really more about the hypocrisy of the current insanity and exposing the absurdity and ridiculousness of it all.
Well, explain the situation with the Haredim, which is the ultra-Orthodox Israelis, and just for the layman, for someone who doesn't even follow Israel that much, what's going on with them and the otherwise universal military service?
Well, the first thing to understand is that the military service is really not all that universal. In theory, it's universal. In practice, there's a whole lot of people who really don't serve. I mean, there are statistics on it, but a sizable amount the country doesn't serve anyway. I mean, I'm not even counting the Arabs here. Outside of the Tilomi communities, the percentages of service are not all that great. The Haredim and the Arabs are obviously on the lowest end of the scale, but it's certainly not universal, and that myth is really feeding this entire insanity.
Yeah, I know this is sort of off on a tangent, but Rabbi Nachman Kahana, who I read regularly, talks about how outrageous it is that they don't serve while Israeli women do. That's just a random thought. I don't know if you have anything there, but...
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm disgusted by a lot of attitudes in some elements of the Haredi community, but at the same time, it's hypocrisy because the left, who are the most outraged about it, many of their kids absolutely don't serve and openly talk about dodging the draft.
Sure.
I'm not even talking about the fake gay stuff, and they just find 20 different ways around it. If you can Google stuff in Hebrew and just Google draft dodging, there's a ton of material. But the real problem here is that you have to create this whole idea that somebody else. You have to create this kind of whole divide and conquer politics, find some scapegoat to explain why things aren't right, and then begin the campaign of blaming everything on them, which is what this is really about. I mean, I can certainly understand why somebody whose children are serving is angry about it, but the reality is it's not just a Haredim. There's a sizable percentage of the country that does not serve, and even those who serve are really there are bigger things to worry about, especially considering how soldiers are being treated these days, the lack of equipment, the kind of reorientation, especially that's taken place in the last 20 years.
Now, you also mentioned, well, actually it's not something you mentioned, but you've mentioned in previous columns that the left is not exactly winning the demographic war in Israel. How does this relate to that?
Well, that's a big slice of the pie, obviously, because the Haredi birth rate is a good deal higher. I mean, Israeli birth rate overall is fairly comfortable. Even the secular Israeli birth rate is higher than the secular Jewish birth rate in the United States, but the Haredi birth rate is obviously the absolute highest. So they're doing these kind of projections and showing, okay, what's going to happen in 50 years is there going to be a Haredi state here, and what are we going to do about it? And there's a certain amount of panic and paranoia spreading over it.
And how does this relate to the very existential threats that Israel is now facing from Iran, and I guess we're hearing more and more about chemical weapons on the loose in Syria?
Well, arguably one of the reasons Jews fight so much with each other is that it's safer than fighting with outsiders. If you're surrounded by enemies, and wherever we are, Jews tend to be surrounded by enemies one way or another, it's much safer to say, okay, we'll fight each other, we'll pick these internal civil wars rather than dealing with the reality of the external threat. And Israel is no different in that regard. Israel is surrounded by enemies. The enemies have gotten a lot more dangerous now, especially with the Arab Spring. And it's easier not to address the kind of disasters that have taken place. The entire idea that Israel can just integrate into the new Middle East And it's easier to just go back to the same old fights, one group versus another, until Israel burns, and hopefully there'll be a wake-up call before that. But right now things are obviously bad, and the burning part is not just a metaphor. There have been a series of Arab arsons, actually.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Finally, can you tie this into the holiday of Tisha B'Av, which is coming up in, I guess, 5 days?
Well, the general interpretation is that by Sheni that the Second Temple fell because of this kind of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, this kind of internal warfare, and certainly it played a role in the collapse of both the First Kingdom, which really split after Shlomo HaMelech into two kingdoms, and certainly in the collapse of the Second Temple and the Second State, where Jews couldn't stop fighting each other long enough to deal with the real enemy, and within that fighting they brought in the Roman Empire, and that was the end of it. The left is still thinking that they can bring in the Arabs and now offset the Haredim. The Haredim are, some of them certainly are still thinking in terms of we'll bring in the Arabs and they'll leave us alone to learn Torah and everything will be fine. So to some extent there's certainly a danger of history repeating itself.
All right, Daniel, thanks as always.